Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke with U.S. President Donald Trump on the phone today, weeks after blowing past the August 1st deadline for a trade deal.
The leaders discussed current trade challenges, opportunities, and shared priorities in a new economic and security relationship between Canada and the U.S. The leaders
After weeks of silence, Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump finally spoke by phone. Ottawa described the conversation as substantive and productive, focused on trade challenges, new economic priorities, and Ukraine. Washington gave no statement, reinforcing the sense of imbalance. Still, the fact that they spoke matters. It was the first contact since Trump's August 1st deadline passed without a deal, triggering a 35% tariff on Canadian goods outside CUSMA and a 50% duty on steel and aluminum. The call comes as Trump pushes a disruptive style of negotiation. Earlier this month, the United States extended 50% tariffs not only on metals, but on more than 400 industrial products containing steel, from cranes to rail cars, even though these items were nominally covered under CUSMA. The message was unmistakable. Trump is willing to stretch rules and keep the threat of leaving CUSMA on the table. But tariffs bring costs at home. Walmart recently warned of higher prices feeding through supply chains. In April, the Yale Budget Lab estimated that the 2025 tariff package would raise U.S. consumer prices by 2.3%, equal to about $3,800 per household using 2024 prices. In July, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco projected that if tariffs remain high, U.S. real incomes could decline by about 0.4% by 2028. The Center for Automotive Research in Michigan also cautioned that a 25% tariff on autos and parts could add $108 billion to industry costs this year. These figures show that disruption abroad is also a strain at home. For Canada, the challenge is immense, but it is not helpless. Carney has resisted calls to match Trump's every move, choosing instead a strategy of patience while holding on to powerful cards. Energy remains the most obvious. In 2024, Canada exported close to 4 million barrels of crude oil per day to the United States, by far America's largest source of imports. Natural gas shipments were more than 8 billion cubic feet per day, and Canada supplied roughly 27% of all uranium used in U.S. nuclear power plants. These are dependencies that Washington cannot easily replace. Canada also holds an advantage in critical minerals. Nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements mined north of the border are essential for electric vehicles and defense supply chains. And despite the new tariffs, about 85% of bilateral trade still moves duty-free under CUSMA, giving Canadian exporters a core of stability while disputes play out. Ottawa has also been selective in retaliation. In March, it applied 25% tariffs on 30 billion Canadian dollars worth of American goods, targeting consumer products like beverages, food items, and motorcycles, pressure points designed to hit politically sensitive constituencies in the United States.
The readout also says Carney and Trump agreed to talk again soon.
Looking forward, 3 paths are possible. One is a framework similar to those signed with the UK, Japan, and South Korea, where tariffs were capped around 10 to 15% in exchange for investment pledges and purchases. Another is for Canada to use energy and minerals more directly in talks, offering stable access in return for tariff relief. A third is legal and structural, from pursuing cases under CUSMA and the WTO to diversifying exports toward Europe and Asia. None of these paths guarantee immediate relief, but they underline that Canada is not without leverage. Trump remains central, but Carney has shown he will not rush into a bad deal. The recent call did not solve the trade standoff, yet it marked the beginning of the next phase, where endurance and strategy will decide how North America's 2 closest partners manage one of their most volatile economic relationships in decades.
This is the effect of Donald Trump's tariffs. I'm going to show you a pretty bad one right here. This is on child's clothes. You can see they ripped off the bottom. That's what it's supposed to look like, $6.98. These are up to $10.98 now. That is a $4 increase.
In the early hours of August 7, 2025, President Donald Trump activated his long-planned global tariff package. Duties of 10 to 50% on more than 90 countries, pushing the average U.S. import rate above 17%, the highest since the Great Depression. Canada was already on his list. Since August 1st, a higher tariff tier has applied to Canadian goods outside USMCA rules, part of a broader offensive that also targeted the European Union, India, Brazil, and Mexico. The intent was straightforward: hit multiple partners at once and extract faster concessions. But as the weeks unfolded, the strain began to boomerang back on the U.S. economy.
Prices are starting to rise for American consumers as President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs on nearly all imported goods are kicking in.
The price shock came from the package as a whole, not just Canada. According to Cox Automotive, new car prices are projected to climb 4 to 8% in 2025. Even Ford, with most of its assembly in the U.S., has paid about $1 billion in tariff costs and raised prices on Mexico-built models. Yale's Budget Lab estimates shoe prices will surge 40% and clothing 38% as tariffs on Vietnam and India squeeze global sportswear brands. Procter & Gamble confirmed in late July it will raise household product prices by single-digit percentages after months of trying to hold the line. Imported staples, olive oil from Europe, Brazilian coffee now under a 50% tariff, and aluminum from Mexico for beer cans are all climbing. Some importers initially absorbed the cost, but retailers warn thin margins won't hold. Walmart has signaled that higher shelf prices are inevitable, while smaller stores feel the pinch sooner. Inflationary pressure is now combining with Trump's push for lower interest rates, raising concerns over a double whammy on consumer prices.
With the looming threat of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs, a Buy Canadian movement has picked up across the country. You may have noticed it when you go into grocery stores or supply shops, a tag that tells you if the product you're about to pick up is made in Canada.
As the global tariff wave began to push up costs in the United States, Ottawa seized the moment to strengthen its negotiating position. Prime Minister Mark Carney held firm on Canada's 25% retaliatory tariffs, targeting U.S. goods tied to influential industries. By keeping that pressure in place, Canada ensured the discomfort was registered not just by corporations, but by lawmakers in Washington.
And I still have to get a can of Campbell's soup that's putting that Canadian flag on, that's not being manufactured here, misleading the people. They're going to rip that label off and encourage people to buy made in Ontario, made in Canada soup.
At home, Ontario Premier Doug Ford amplified the strategy. His push for clear origin labeling and his public criticism of companies outsourcing production showed a united political front committed to protecting domestic industry. These moves weren't only about internal policy. They signaled to the U.S. that Canada's leadership was aligned and prepared to act in defense of its interests. Meanwhile, Canada accelerated trade diversification toward the EU, UK, and Mexico, reducing dependence on the U.S. market precisely as American import costs were climbing. The combination of targeted tariffs, domestic unity, and new trade channels turned a defensive posture into a calculated offense, allowing Canada to press its advantage while Trump faced growing economic pressure at home. Trump began August with an aggressive trade play, expecting quick compliance from partners. Instead, his global tariff web has spread economic pressure across U.S. industries and households, while Canada has held steady. By maintaining its countermeasures, reinforcing domestic production, and diversifying export markets, Ottawa has positioned itself as an active player, not a subordinate. The contest is now a measured standoff. The U.S. wields market scale, Canada holds supply chain and resource leverage. The final outcome remains uncertain, but one fact is clear. The tariffs designed to force Canada into retreat have instead created a more balanced battlefield where Ottawa can negotiate from strength and shape the terms of the next move.
This guy's coming at us. I just want to go on record. He's coming full bore at us. We got to move quicker, and folks, be ready. He's not waiting till 2026. At any given time, President Trump, he could pull the carpet out from underneath us on Kuzma tomorrow with one signature.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford didn't mince words. In a press conference that cut through political nuance, he warned that President Trump could end the Kuzma trade agreement, not in 2026 as expected, but as early as November 2025. And he may not even follow a formal process. All it could take is one signature. Ford called on Canadians to brace themselves. This wasn't a normal trade dispute, he said. It's something far more volatile. Coming from a provincial leader with strong ties to business and conservative circles, the message landed with weight. The concern is not hypothetical. Ford isn't just worried about tariffs. He's worried about CUSMA itself, the legal backbone of North American trade.
Almost every country in the world that's trying to negotiate with this administration, it's very challenging. You think you're getting close to a deal, and then the cheese slips off the cracker when it gets to the president's desk. So, look, I think Ford's right.
That concern is echoed at the national level. Conservative strategist Corey Tanaki said it plainly. The worst may still be ahead. Trump's approach isn't rooted in conventional trade norms. He's abandoned negotiation frameworks, rejected predictability, and applied pressure without offering a path to resolution. The 35% tariffs imposed on Canada under the IEEPA are just one example. The deal-making process now moves according to Trump's timeline and his mood. It's not just Ford who's lost trust. There's growing doubt across Canada's leadership that any deal with this U.S. administration can be relied on. After all, Trump is threatening to override agreements he once championed. CUSMA itself was signed under his presidency.
Canada and Mexico themselves have about $50 billion in two-way trade, so that's nothing to sneeze at. It's highly unpredictable, and so both sides need to sort of get together and figure out what the hell's going on.
While Trump escalates, Canada and Mexico are recalibrating. This week, Canada's foreign affairs and finance ministers traveled to Mexico for high-level talks. The agenda wasn't ceremonial, it was strategic. Trade officials and business leaders from both countries sat down to align supply chain goals, discuss trade infrastructure, and build a united response to what one expert called a toxic atmosphere. Both Canada and Mexico are being hit with emergency tariffs, though Mexico was granted a 90-day pause. Yet the message is clear. Neither country trusts the current state of U.S. trade policy. In place of that trust, they're forming their own foundation, one grounded in mutual reliability, not coercion. But building that foundation takes time, and time is exactly what the markets may not have. On July 31st, the U.S. Court of Appeals reviewed the legality of Trump's emergency tariffs. Lower courts had ruled against them, but let them proceed, citing ongoing talks with China. If courts strike them down, Canada might be better off waiting than rushing into a bad deal. Ottawa now faces a dilemma. Take a risky agreement or wait for legal clarity that may never come.
We can either wring our hands and lament the fact that the U.S. administration is doing this, or we can get to work on building our own economy by getting started on projects that frankly should have been done 20 years ago.
Inside Canada, the message is starting to sink in. Yes, provinces have different priorities. Alberta wants to protect oil, Ontario its auto and steel industries, and Quebec its aluminum. But Ford noted that 98% of what's needed is shared. The divisions are shrinking. The urgency is growing. Large-scale national infrastructure projects, long stalled, are being revisited as a way to build internal economic strength and reduce dependence on unpredictable trade flows. It's not just about defending sectors anymore. It's about defending sovereignty. Trump couldn't force Canada to fold with tariffs. And now, facing a firm but calm Canadian government, he may try something else, dismantling the agreement entirely. Ford's warning was blunt because the stakes are real. Without CUSMA, decades of trade predictability could vanish overnight. Canada and Mexico are no longer reacting, they're preparing. Because when trade becomes a power game, stability becomes strategy. And in this game, survival may depend not on what Trump does next, but on how Canada and Mexico respond together.